Hi, I am Tony Russo, and this is In Case You Missed It from Kates-Boylston for the week ending Friday, February 13th, 2026. Got a bunch of cool stuff to get into, some controversial stories coming up, and I'm looking forward to sharing them with you. But before that, I want to let you know this is going to be my last episode of In Case You Missed It. It's been a pleasure making these. If you stay on till the end, I'll say a longer goodbye, but in case you don't, I don't want you to be surprised if you show up next week and I'm not sitting in this chair. All right, let's get right to it. So some stories you read and then you read them again. You're like, that's not really what it says. But so far it is. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission has sued Everstory, the owners of then Stonemore, for barring black workers from restrooms in Memphis, Tennessee. No, this is not 1962. And it's probably not as simple as that. Honestly, I've reached out to Everstory. Hopefully that they'll respond with some sort of balanced response or some sort of response at all, because the complaint doesn't read well. The shortest version that I can give you, and that's what I'm here for, to give you the shortest version, is that there's one nice restroom facility in the mansion-shaped cemetery/funeral home area. And the groundskeepers were not allowed in there. The black groundskeepers happened to be black people, I guess, but also the black admins who worked inside weren't allowed in the bathroom. And they weren't listening to not being allowed in the bathroom, so one of the employees locked the door with a combination key and wouldn't give it to anyone who, according to the filing, wasn't a white person. There's a little bit of discrepancy that I've come up with, and that's why I'm hoping Everstory will respond and let me know precisely what the deal was. But when the workers complained, they threatened to fire them for complaining discrimination. And when one of the leaders complained about discrimination, he was fired. But he was fired allegedly for a botched burial. And there's all sorts of weird stuff that goes with that as well. He claims he wasn't on vacation. He wasn't even there when the wrong body was buried at the wrong place. And his two supervisors were not disciplined. So the people at the top, kind of at the top. And that's the other thing. And that's what's really kind of troubling. This all happened, I think, back in 2022. And this went 3 layers. So there was a regional manager from Stonemore involved in the decision to fire someone for filing an equal employment opportunity complaint. I don't know how you missed that one in business school. If someone's already gone to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the best thing to do is just write it out. Fire them after, or I don't know. So it's strange to see that that's the route they've taken. Following that, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission reached out to Everstory and said, okay, this is the evidence, and this is what we'd like you to do to fix it, and these are the fines. And Everstory said, no, we'll see you in court. So they either have, evidence that they've not, presented. And again, there's no statement from them. And that's important to say, because, you see, banning black people from bathrooms in Memphis, and it makes you feel ugly inside. It makes me feel ugly inside. So, if I would love it if there were a reasonable explanation. I do know from my time in the hotel business that there were always managers who really were very, very interested in who used which bathrooms when it came to employees walking around in the guest area. Of course, the hotels had other bathrooms. I'm sorry, I left that part out of the story, and that's an important part. And so the gentlemen who weren't allowed to use the indoor bathrooms had to drive to the gas station down the block, which is also where they had to have their break room because they weren't allowed to use the quote preferred unquote break room in the facility. So, hopefully we'll get another picture of what's going on from Everstory. But either way, there's a link to the story in the show notes. Service Corporation International presented its earnings today, and there'll be a link to the presentation if that's something you want to look at. There'll be a link to the press release if there's something you want to look at. The one thing that struck me, though, that I wanted to kind of just bring your attention to was the disconnect between SCI and the analysts when it came to direct cremation. Now that the pull forward effect is officially over, I believe, they want to know where the volume is going to come from. There were a couple of analysts who were worried that SCI didn't see enough of a bump from the flu season, and others, and it was really interesting to hear them break it down because they talked about 2019. And I think that, if you're in the funeral business, you'll probably have, I believe, the same experiences that you hopefully, or SCI at least, has grown as it would have if COVID didn't happen. So those 3 or 4 years of, spectacular business and, an horrible death, but spectacular business were, I don't want to say black swan events because I don't want to give it a mouth, but there is, it's as business gets back to normal, there is pressure to grow, especially, SCI direct. From the analysts. And I think SCI did a good job at explaining why they were doing everything they could with SCI Direct. I'd be interested to see how the next 5 years treats direct cremation. I think that now that I wonder if direct cremation, the rise of direct cremation was also kind of a function of exhaustion, where, when eventually you just have to, get through all of these people. And, I've heard funeral directors say it before, that people were trained to, that consumers were trained to think of cremation as like the cheap alternative. And that's something that I think everybody is working to undo. And speaking of which, Cana has their convention coming up, and I'm sure there's going to be lots of information about cremation coming up in the first week of March. So that's something to keep an eye out for anyway. Link to the SCI reports in the show notes. But keep your eye on direct cremation and see where that goes over the next decade, because I've got another story for you, and it's up next. So there is a documentary in production now, in post-production rather, it's already been filmed, called Death Boom, which tackles the ecological and psychological effects that COVID and death care in general have on the employees. And when I first read the story, and again, there's a link to the story in the show notes. When I first read the story, my impression was that this was about how funeral homes navigated COVID. But in reading the description of the film, it's more about how casketed burial and cremation aren't ideal ecologically, and how some of these green solutions can overcome some of the concerns about cremation and casketed burial. I've got to say, and I'm one of the greener guys in the room. I can't get as head up about cremation as everyone else seems to be able to be. It seems like it's a big, easy target. And I think that if we look at what's been done with crematories, we'll see that it's not. I mean, if you're driving a Hummer to the funeral home, then I don't think cremation is what is what's doing the real damage. But anyway, there's a link to the story in the show notes. Probably won't be out for another year, I guess, or maybe 6 months if it's in post-production. And it's a documentary. It's an expose documentary, which makes me think it's heavy-handed. Nobody puts expose in front of something that is even-handed. But anyway, as I said, link in the show notes. So natural organic reduction is legal wherever it is legal now. And that comes from a story about Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, which is partnering with a German company called Meine Erde, I think that's My Earth, to provide vessels, which has been a sticking point for funeral homes interested in offering terramation since it was legalized. So that's really exciting. The idea that it's easier for funeral homes to get into this method of disposition if that's what they want. Because I just did a story on how they're making it easier to do the transport and how some of the other burial options, some of the other disposition options are growing. So these are all good newses, and I wanted to share them with you. But I can't help it to take the cheap shots when they present themselves. It says some religious leaders oppose the practice. We'll set that aside, but I think it's a good picture of how America kind of sees death care. So the Muslim, it's really like a bad joke. The Muslim representatives is like, well, it's not really for Muslims, but pluralism's important. And the Jewish rabbi is like, well, we really don't prefer that, but we know that a lot of Jewish people are interested in it, but it's not really what we do. And the Catholics are say it is a desecration of the body and no one should ever be allowed to do it. And that is all you need to know about the religious arguments over disposition in 3 short descriptions. Anyway, there's a link to the story in the show notes, and there's a little video that goes with it if you want to hear everybody, give their 3, a priest, a rabbi, and an imam walk into a bar take on human composting. You can watch the video and you'll see that there. And I guess in Tony's being a little too flippant news, I posted this story called State Orders Southern Colorado Funeral Home to Shut Down. And I said this goes under the no good deed goes unpunished section. So here's what happened. Wilson Funeral Home in Southern Colorado was essentially defunct. It's not defunct. It's a larger company. They weren't going to use that building for embalming bodies anymore. They were just using it as a meeting place. However, they had a contract with the county, and the county was paying them $7,500 a month to store bodies there. The funeral home group owner decided not to renew the license on that funeral home, figuring that he wasn't really using it, and that since the state was using it, no one would care if it wasn't a licensed funeral home. That's not the case. So they shuttered him, and he was fined. And when I said the no good deed goes unpunished, a Southern Colorado funeral director took the trouble to point out that they were not only paid but well paid, and the price of the license wasn't worth undermining the idea that a license is an important thing to have, especially in Colorado, with all that's been going on there. So there is a link in the show notes to the story, and I've provided it. Once again, I want to take a moment to thank you guys for coming and hanging out with me each week. It has been a pleasure to think about during the week what stories I'm going to use and to what effect. And I've just enjoyed doing this, and I'm not going away. I'm just stopping this. So if you would like to try and find me, it is not very hard. in case you missed it, has been a Kates-Boylston production. It was written and edited and videoed by me, Tony Russo. Please subscribe wherever you're listening now. And it's been a pleasure. I will check in with you some other time.